one of the things I found really interesting is over the last little while, I've noticed this increase in this resurgence in this interest in Jesus again. And I've seen a lot of the really kind of other podcasts, social media people really starting to embrace or kind of revisit Jesus in that. And I just wanted to get your opinion. Why do you think that maybe is that this is kind of happening?
Yeah, I've noticed that too, Michael. I think there's two factors involved. Um, One is that more people realize that there was a Jesus before Christianity, which is sort of in my area. In other words, that Christianity does not own Jesus and Jesus did not create Christianity. You could say this is true of the other prophets or mystics who started what later became organized or institutionalized religions, but is particularly true of Jesus, and it's particularly important because a lot of, you could say, Christianity from the Roman Empire on, Roman Christianity became sort of the basis of Western culture. So a lot of these things that are even, people don't realize are religious, they do sort of filter into the way we live our lives today. So that's one factor. The other factor is I believe, and this is just an impression and intuition, that more people are, outside of any religion, receiving what we could only call downloads from Jesus in their inner vision, or whatever you want to call it, or receiving messages as though they could be from him, and they could easily be. We had, in the earlier part of the 20th century and throughout the 20th century, many people had visions of Mary, that is Jesus's mother. And I think more and more people today are recognizing that they can find, how would we say, messages from Jesus from the unseen world coming through, not exclusively to them, but also to them. And I think that's an interesting feature. I mean, Rudolf Steiner pointed this out, if you know some of his work.
Yeah,
That
very familiar with Rudolf Steiner. Love his work.
So Steiner says, that don't look for the second coming in a person, look for it in the way humanity's consciousness opens to find, you could say, the Jesus, the Messiah, the cosmic Christ in nature or all around them or in each other, progressively, gradually. And, it's pretty gradual at this stage, but one can see this popping up here and there as I survey the scene.
Yeah, I was just finding it so fascinating as someone who comes from a Christian background and was raised Roman Catholic. I mean, for years I struggled with the idea, this dogma of Christianity and especially Catholicism. It just didn't resonate with me. And as I got older and when I started doing this podcast, there was this kind of thought process of there was something I felt was missing in the religion itself. And as I got to talk to people like yourself who really have a good understanding of things outside my own knowledge, and I was just kind of like really excited about this because this is something I think it's really important for people that they can really separate the teachings and understanding the teachings from the dogmatic practices of the religion. And that idea of like, these downloads, which is something interesting because most people really don't talk about having like a download of that kind of Christ consciousness. And I think from my understanding, that's the whole, I would say, I want to kind of cold note it, but it's kind of like, that's the impression of the teaching is to connect with that divine Christ consciousness. And,
Yes.
And get that,
Yes.
and then be a vessel for that into the world.
Yes, I mean, that is it. And I have several hats, as you probably know, that I wear. One is a more scholarly hat, 40 years, 50 years of work with Jesus's native language, Aramaic. And the other is having intoned those words, prayed with those words, meditated with those words. I also have an inner feeling. Also, I have, you could say, I don't want to lean too hard on it, but I also, as I'm doing my work, I have both sides. You could say going the open doorways to the inner world, and then also, I use all this scholarly stuff that I've developed over the years to basically justify a lot of that and help people eliminate some of those false conceptions that they've had from their childhood often about who Jesus was, false conceptions they've received obviously from dogma through various various churches. So I'm able to show sort of chapter, verse, word for word, how some of those false interpretations occurred, and basically why they're sometimes almost diametrically opposed to what Yeshua, Jesus' name in Aramaic, was actually talking about.
Yeah, like how do we reconcile that? Because you have this, like again, you have this the scholarly side that's been studying this
Now,
I guess Jesus's native language, which for most people I always thought was Hebrew. And this idea that you can take it, this very much, philosophical base, but also have this deeply spiritual connection and what you received. And how did you reconcile the stuff that you were kind of getting yourself through your, I would again say downloads, versus the stuff that academically you would research and find out? How would you kind of go, well, that doesn't make sense. This is what I kind of found. But then that really reinforces what I just got from that divine Christ consciousness.
well, yeah, excellent question, Michael.
I try to have those once in a while on my show.
That's good. As many people, I started out as a child. No, most people did. But, I had some inner feeling experience, you could even say visionary experiences of Jesus as a child. Fortunately, I was raised in a rather free-thinking family who read Bible stories to myself and my brothers, but they were not really that bothered about Christian dogma. My father was an early chiropractor in Illinois. My parents were very much into Rachel Carson's work, Silent Spring, the early organic gardening and farming movement, and also sort of on the QT under the table, they were very much involved with Edgar Cayce study groups.
Well, there
So,
you go. You know
you
what?
know,
I'm a big fan of Edgar Cayce. Everybody knows this on my podcast. So yeah, that's
that's what I
amazing.
was raised with. I said I was raised with the Holy Trinity, chiropractic, Cayce, and Carson.
That's
So
amazing. Wow.
I know. So I started there, but because my father was a bit of an oddball in the community and he had to work there in a small town, he sent us to quite formal and conservative Christian elementary schools. Actually, it was quite conservative at the time, and I had to learn all of Luther's Small Catechism by heart. I had to learn large parts of the King James translation of the Bible by heart, and then stand up and repeat things verbatim in church if you were asked random questions about this or that. So it was very, very good memory training.
Yeah.
At the same time, my parents are from an immigrant family, so I heard, different languages growing up in my childhood. Not just English, but English, German, Polish, Yiddish, and a bit of Russian. So when one hears different languages as a child, as I'm sure many of your listeners know, this predisposes one to be more open to learn other languages later on in life. I'm not sure how that exactly works, but it did seem to work in my case. So after I had left Christianity as far as I could go when I went to university, as some of us do, and became very much involved in social action as an investigative journalist. And in my 20s, I was, working on a lot of stuff like that, especially in the food and drugs area. I was investigating what is adulterating food and drugs. And, I was part of the early ecological movement because I had that stuff in my family, you see. I
Mhm.
had holistic health in my family. I knew a lot about it even before I started to investigate. So I learned how to do actual investigation before there was the internet. This was in the 70s and early 80s. And when I actually had to develop sources and look up stuff in government documents and see what people are hiding and all that stuff. So I clearly had some predisposition to trying to investigate, find out things, find out what's really going on. So I'm telling my whole story here. But anyway, long
But
story
no, but
short,
that's just, honestly, I love this. This is part of why I do the podcast, is to find out people's stories too. Because as much as the information that we talk about is really important, but it's the person we get to connect with, right? Because this is my first time actually speaking to you. So I get to know you, and my listeners get to know you. And that's part
sure.
of the joy of it. So feel free. This is even the podcast is not 10 minutes, it's not 20 minutes. We got a full hour. We can dive into it. And if we don't get to all the stuff, that's okay. because we can always refer them to your collection of works anyways too, which
Sure.
I'll probably do at the end of the show anyway. So, but yeah, just
Thank you,
continue on.
Michael.
Yeah, just continue on. Yeah, please.
Well, I'm almost sort of the penultimate point, if you want to talk about that. So as a young journalist working in alternative journalism, which we had in the U.S. in those days, actually a large alternative press, you could say, network. This is before the internet again, but of print publications, college, university, so-called underground newspapers, alternative newspapers, things like that, which were very much in evidence in the early 80s. And I worked for a group that was syndicating stories to this particular group, and so we were all investigative reporters. But at a certain point, I burned out from that. I mean, I wasn't even 30, and I totally burnt out because I discovered that people don't make changes in their lives based on what they read. Go figure. He's like,
Yeah.
you should have known this, Neil. But anyway, so I sort of burned out on this, and then I had to ask myself, well, Neil, why do you make changes in your life? Yeah, so I was trying to figure out why do you make changes? Do you make change? Why does one make changes on basis of facts or on the basis of something else? And what is that something else? So it's one of these key questions that many people come to that lead them on some sort of spiritual search.